My mother-in-law called me worthless across a dinner table set with fine china and crystal glasses, her voice sharp enough to cut through the room, and my husband, my own husband, leaned back in his chair and laughed like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I was a joke they had both agreed on long before I walked in. I remember the exact moment because my hand was wrapped around a glass of water, and I suddenly couldn't feel my fingers anymore, and yet I didn't say a word. Not then, not when she kept going, not when he added, "She doesn't contribute anything anyway." Because what they didn't know was that my phone had already been recording everything, and the file had already been sent to my attorney before dinner was even halfway over. And if you're listening right now, only if this story truly resonates with you, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country, even your local time. Because stories like this, they connect us in ways we don't expect. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and that night at my mother-in-law's house was the night everything in my marriage and my entire family began to fall apart. But to understand how I sat there in silence while they tore me down, you need to go back with me to where this all really started, 3 weeks earlier, on a quiet Tuesday morning that felt completely normal, until I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, which he never did, not in 6 years of marriage, not once, and I wasn't trying to snoop. I wasn't that kind of wife. But the screen was already on, and there it was, a document I didn't recognize, a draft titled Asset Reallocation Strategy. My name buried in the second paragraph next to words like limited capacity and financial oversight. And I remember reading it once, then again slower, my stomach tightening with each line. It sounded clinical, almost professional, but something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't just a financial document. It felt like a plan, like someone was building a case. And when I heard Daniel's car pull into the driveway, I closed the laptop and stepped back like I had never been there. But that was the first crack, the first moment I realized something in my own home was shifting beneath my feet. And over the next few days, those small moments started adding up. Whispered phone calls that stopped when I entered the room, his mother suddenly visiting more often, conversations that went quiet when I got too close, and I told myself I was overthinking it, that stress does strange things to people, that maybe I was the one imagining patterns that weren't there. But then came the night I overheard Margaret say something she didn't know I could hear, and that was the moment everything stopped feeling like suspicion and started feeling like proof. I stood in the hallway just outside the kitchen, my hand still resting against the wall as Margaret's voice carried through the half-closed door, low but clear enough to freeze me in place. "If she keeps control of the accounts, this will never work," she said, and there was a pause, the kind that felt heavy, like someone was choosing their words carefully. And then Daniel answered, quieter than I had ever heard him. "She will not keep control much longer." And something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. Not anger, not yet, but something colder, something that felt like the ground shifting under me. I leaned closer without thinking, my breath shallow, trying not to make a sound, and Margaret let out a soft, almost satisfied hum. Good. Because the longer you wait, the harder it will be to prove she cannot manage things on her own. And I felt those words hit me like a quiet accusation, like a label I had never agreed to wear. "We just need a few more examples," Daniel said, and I could hear the faint clink of a glass as he set it down. "Mom, tonight was perfect." She barely said anything. She just sat there, and Margaret laughed under her breath. "Exactly passive, withdrawn. It fits perfectly." I pulled back slowly, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it through the walls. Examples, proof, passive, withdrawn. They were not just talking about me. They were building something. Something deliberate? Something that sounded disturbingly official. And for a moment I questioned myself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was twisting their words. But deep down I knew I was not. Because suddenly, every strange moment over the past few weeks lined up in a way that made terrifying sense. The document on his laptop, the quiet phone calls, the way he had started correcting me in front of others. Subtly, like planting seeds. "Emily gets confused sometimes," he had said once to a friend, laughing it off like a joke, And I had laughed too, because that is what you do when you trust someone. You assume they mean well. But now standing there in that hallway, I realized those were not jokes. They were rehearsals. I stepped away from the door before they could come out and see me, moving quickly but carefully down the hall and into the guest bathroom, closing the door behind me as quietly as I could. My reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Pale, eyes wide, like I was seeing myself from the outside for the first time. I turned on the faucet just enough to mask any sound and leaned over the sink, gripping the edge until my knuckles turned white. They were trying to take control, not just of money, but of the narrative, of who I was, of how I would be seen if this ever reached a courtroom. And that word echoed in my mind, courtroom, because suddenly it did not feel far away. It felt inevitable. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, my hands shaking just slightly as I opened the settings and found the voice memo app. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, hesitating, because once I did this, once I crossed that line, there was no going back to pretending everything was fine. But then I heard Margaret's voice again faintly through the wall, still talking, still planning, and something inside me settled, not calm, not exactly, but focused. I tapped record, watching the timer start counting up in seconds, and slipped the phone back into my pocket, letting it run, letting it capture whatever came next. Because if they were building a case against me, then I was done being unprepared. I was done being the person who trusted blindly. I straightened up, turned off the faucet, and looked at myself one more time in the mirror, this time with a different kind of awareness. Not confusion, not doubt, but recognition. This was no longer just a marriage problem. This was strategy. And if they thought I was going to sit quietly while they rewrote my life, they were about to learn just how wrong they were, because that was the moment I stopped reacting and started paying attention to every single word they said. I left that house that night with the recording still running in my pocket. The cold air hitting my face as I stepped outside felt sharper than usual, like I had just walked out of something I could not step back into. And the entire drive home I said nothing, even when Daniel tried to fill the silence with casual conversation, asking if I was tired, if I wanted coffee, if everything was okay, and I nodded at the right moments, gave the right small answers, because for the first time in our marriage, I was not trying to fix the tension. I was studying it. I was listening to every word, every tone, every hesitation. And when we got home, he went straight to his office like he always did, closing the door behind him, and I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the counter where his laptop usually sat, remembering that document, remembering the language, the careful phrasing that sounded like it belonged in a legal filing. And that was when I knew I needed someone who understood exactly what I was looking at, someone who could tell me if what I feared was real. I waited until he fell asleep that night, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing from the bedroom before I quietly slipped out to the living room, my phone still in my hand, and I sat down on the couch, replaying the recording from earlier, every word clearer now in the silence. Margaret's voice, confident, certain. Daniel's voice, measured, controlled. And then that sentence again, she will not keep control much longer. I paused the audio and stared at the screen, my reflection faintly visible in the glass, and something inside me shifted again. This time not fear, not confusion, but resolve. I opened my email and searched for a name I had not thought about in years. Olivia Hayes, the attorney who had helped my older sister through a complicated estate case, someone I remembered as calm, precise, and impossible to manipulate, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before I attached the audio file, writing a simple message, "I need your advice." Urgent. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I sat there in the dim light of the living room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something steady beneath the chaos. The next morning, I woke up before Daniel, moving through the routine like nothing had changed, making coffee, setting out his mug exactly the way he liked it, and when he came into the kitchen, he smiled at me, that same easy smile that used to make me feel safe. "You okay?" he asked. And I met his eyes for a second longer than usual, searching for something, any sign of hesitation, but there was nothing, just calm, practiced normalcy. "I am fine," I said, and I meant it in a way he could not understand, because I was no longer guessing. I was waiting, By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with an unknown number, and when I answered, the voice on the other end was steady, professional. "Emily, this is Olivia Hayes." And I felt my grip tighten around the phone. "I listened to what you sent," she continued, a brief pause that felt heavy with meaning. "You were right to reach out." I closed my eyes for a second, letting those words settle, because confirmation has a different weight than suspicion. It makes everything sharper, more real. "What does it mean?" I asked quietly, and Olivia did not rush her answer. "It means they are not just talking, they are positioning you," she said. "If they can establish a pattern that questions your ability to manage finances or make decisions, they could attempt to gain legal control over shared assets, possibly more depending on how far they are willing to go." My stomach tightened again, but this time I did not feel lost. I felt focused. "And the recording?" I asked. "It helps," she said. "But it is just the beginning. If you want to protect yourself, we need more. Documentation, timelines, anything that shows intent." I nodded even though she could not see me, my mind already shifting into a different mode, one that felt unfamiliar but necessary. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Then I will get it." And when the call ended, I stood there in the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, Daniel's empty coffee mug still sitting by the sink, and I realized something that changed everything. They thought they were preparing for a quiet takeover, something controlled, something inevitable, but they had no idea that I had already stepped into the same game, and I was no longer playing blind. I did not confront him, not that day, not the next, because every instinct that used to push me to talk things through, to fix what felt broken, was now replaced by something quieter and far more deliberate. I started watching, really watching, the way he moved through the house, the way he checked his phone before answering, the way his tone shifted depending on who he was speaking to, and for the first time I noticed patterns I had missed before, like how every financial conversation suddenly became complicated when I was involved, how he would interrupt me mid-sentence with a soft correction that sounded harmless but slowly chipped away at my confidence in front of others, and I let it happen. I let him do it again at dinner 2 nights later when he said, "Emily sometimes forgets details," and I forced a small smile, nodding like I agreed, even though inside I was cataloging the exact wording, the exact moment, because Olivia's voice echoed in my mind, documentation, timelines, intent, so I started building my own record. Quietly, carefully, I went back through emails, saving anything that felt even slightly off, threads where decisions were made without me, documents I was never meant to see. I photographed bank statements, took screenshots of account changes, anything that showed a shift in control, and each piece added weight to something I could not yet fully see but knew was forming. And then there were the calls, the ones he took in the hallway or outside on the back porch, thinking I could not hear. But I started leaving my phone nearby, recording whenever I could, capturing fragments of conversations, his voice lower, more guarded, discussing timelines, mentioning his mother more often than he realized. And one night, just after 11, I caught something that made everything sharper. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read when his phone rang and he stepped outside, but he did not close the sliding door all the way, and his voice carried just enough. "We cannot rush it," he said, pacing slowly. "If we push too fast, it will look suspicious." There was a pause, and then he added, "She still trusts me." And those 4 words settled over me in a way I will never forget, not because they hurt, but because they confirmed exactly what Olivia had warned me about. This was not emotional. This was strategic. I did not move until he came back inside, and when he did, I looked up and smiled like nothing had changed, like I was still the version of me he believed he understood. But inside, something had fully shifted. I was no longer reacting to what was happening. I was anticipating it, guiding it, giving them just enough space to continue, just enough comfort to believe their plan was working. And the next morning, I met Olivia in her office, a quiet building downtown with glass walls and a view of the city that felt strangely distant from everything I was living through. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The recordings, the documents, the patterns, and when I finished, she leaned back slightly, her expression calm but focused. "They are building a case to undermine your legal standing," she said. "If they succeed, they could petition for control over shared assets Possibly more if they can convince a court that you are not capable. I felt the weight of that settle in, but I did not panic, not anymore. And what do we do? I asked, and Olivia's response was immediate. We let them continue, she said, but on our terms. And she outlined it step by step, how we would strengthen the timeline, how we would document every interaction, how we would allow them to expose more of their intent without ever realizing it. And for the first time, I saw the full shape of what this could become, not just defense, but leverage, not just protection, but accountability. I left her office with a folder in my hand and a clarity I had not felt in weeks. The city noise louder now, sharper, like everything around me had come into focus. And as I walked back to my car, I realized something that steadied me in a way nothing else had. They believed they were guiding me into a corner, shaping a narrative I could not escape, but they had no idea that every step they took forward was already being recorded, documented, and quietly redirected. And by the time they realized it, it would be far too late to take any of it back. By the end of that week, I had stopped seeing my home as a place of comfort and started seeing it as a stage. Every room, a place where something could be revealed. Every conversation, an opportunity to collect one more piece of the truth. And the strangest part was how easy it became to play my role, to smile at the right moments, to ask questions that sounded harmless but nudged them into saying more than they intended. Like the afternoon I casually mentioned, feeling overwhelmed with managing the household finances, watching Daniel's reaction carefully as I said it, and I saw it instantly, that flicker of interest he tried to hide, the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly, like I had just confirmed something he had been hoping for. It might be better if I handled more of that, he said gently, stepping closer, his tone soft, reassuring, but underneath it there was something calculated, something rehearsed, and I nodded slowly, like I was considering it, like I was unsure of myself, even adding a quiet, maybe you are right, just enough to feed the version of me they were trying to create. And that night, I documented everything, the exact wording, the time, the shift in his behavior, sending it all to Olivia, who responded with one line that stayed with me. They are getting comfortable. And comfort, I realized, was exactly what we needed, because comfort makes people careless, and careless people reveal everything. The next dinner invitation came from Margaret 2 days later, her message overly polite, almost warm, which alone was enough to tell me something was different. And when I told Daniel I would go, I watched his reaction again, the quick glance, the subtle nod, like something was aligning behind the scenes. And as I got ready that evening, standing in front of the mirror adjusting my blouse, I slipped my phone into my bag, already set to record, the battery fully charged, storage cleared, every detail prepared, because this time I was not just observing, I was setting the stage too. The house looked the same when we arrived, the same polished table, the same careful presentation, but the atmosphere felt heavier, like there was an expectation in the air that had not been there before. Margaret greeted me with a smile that did not reach her eyes, her tone sweet but edged with something sharper underneath, and I responded just as carefully, keeping my voice steady, my movements calm, taking my seat at the table as if this were any other night. But inside I was focused on one thing, listening, and it did not take long. The conversation started light, surface level, but slowly, deliberately, it shifted. Margaret bringing up small comments about responsibility, about how difficult it can be to manage complex things, her words vague but pointed. And then Daniel joined in, adding a story about a friend who had lost control of his finances because his partner could not keep track of things, and I recognized the pattern immediately. The setup, the framing, the slow push toward a conclusion they wanted me to accept, and I let them continue, nodding occasionally, asking small questions that encouraged them to explain more, to clarify, to step further into their own narrative. And then it happened. The moment everything sharpened again, Margaret set her fork down and looked directly at me, her expression shifting just slightly as she said, "Some people just are not equipped to handle certain responsibilities, Emily, and there is no shame in that." And there it was, clear, direct, undeniable, and I felt Daniel watching me, waiting for my reaction, waiting to see if I would defend myself, argue, prove their point in some way. But I did not. I simply held her gaze for a moment and then looked down at my plate, silent, and in that silence, they filled the space exactly as Olivia had predicted, saying more, explaining more, revealing more than they ever would have if I had pushed back, and all the while, my phone sat quietly in my bag, capturing every word, every tone, every intention, building something far stronger than anything they thought they were creating. And as the dinner continued, I realized something with complete clarity. They believed this was the night they were establishing control, the night they were confirming their version of me. But in reality, this was the night they gave me exactly what I needed to ensure they would never control anything again. Life does not snap back to normal after something like that. It settles into something quieter, something clearer, and in my case, something finally honest. A few months have passed since that night at the dinner table, and I no longer wake up feeling like I have to measure my words or second-guess my thoughts. The house I once shared with Daniel is no longer mine, but strangely, I have never felt more at home than I do now. In a smaller apartment filled only with things I chose for myself, the legal process was not loud or dramatic the way people imagine. It was precise, methodical, built on the very evidence they handed me so freely. The recordings, the documents, the timeline. It all came together in a way that left no room for their narrative to survive. And when the truth was finally laid out in front of them, not in anger, not in chaos, but in quiet, undeniable clarity, there was no laughter left, no smirks, no carefully controlled tone, just silence. The kind of silence that comes when a plan collapses under the weight of its own intent. And I remember walking out of that moment not feeling victorious, but something deeper, something steadier. I felt free, because for the first time in a long time, I was no longer trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided it for me. I was simply standing in my own truth, and that changes everything. What I learned through all of this is something I wish someone had told me earlier. Your intuition is not something to ignore or explain away. It is often the first voice trying to protect you when something is not right. And when people begin to question your reality, your capability, your sense of self, especially in subtle ways, that is not concern, that is control. And control thrives in silence, in doubt, in hesitation. So you have to protect more than just your heart. You have to protect your clarity, your independence, your access to your own life, financially, emotionally, mentally, because once those things are compromised, everything else becomes easier for someone else to rewrite. And if you are listening to this and something in your life feels off, even if you cannot explain it yet, do not dismiss that feeling. Do not rush to defend someone else at the expense of yourself. Pay attention, ask questions, document what matters, and most importantly, do not shrink yourself to make someone else more comfortable. You are allowed to take up space in your own story. You are allowed to protect what is yours, and you are allowed to walk away from anything that tries to reduce you to something less than who you are. Healing is not loud. It does not happen all at once. It happens in small decisions, in choosing yourself again and again, even when it feels unfamiliar. And for me, that meant rebuilding not just my life, but my trust in my own voice, my own judgment, my own strength. I believe now more than ever that God or the universe, however you see it, gives us signals long before the storm fully arrives. And sometimes the real courage is not in fighting harder, but in finally listening. Thank you for staying with me through this story, for holding space for something that is not easy to share. And if even one part of this made you feel seen or understood, then that means more than I can fully put into words. You are not alone in what you are going through, and you are stronger than you have been led to believe. If you feel comfortable, share where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now, because I truly want to know who is out there on the other side of this. And if this story stayed with you, you can follow along for more. My name is Emily. I am 32 years old, and the core lesson I want to leave you with is this: never let anyone else define your worth when you already know who you are.